We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, or essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. The whole, I mean, so many of the cities. I mean, they haven't done it in Kiev because I guess they don't want to shoot too many rockets in there. They've done it 20%, but they haven't done it 100%. If they wanted to do it 100%, it would probably happen very quickly. But you have cities that are absolutely decimated. And yeah, I would say that, you know, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people have to, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, you know, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also. You know, Ukraine is being just wiped out. Look at what's happening to the cities. There are cities, there's not even a building standing. It's a massive, you talk about Gaza. I mean, it's literally, these cities look like Gaza. Actually, many have, percentage-wise, more buildings knocked down than in Gaza. So, you know, people are tired of it. People want to see something happen. And, you know, the other thing that it's been bothering me for a long time, because I solved the problem with NATO. They paid hundreds of billions of dollars into the funds of NATO when I said, you got to pay, because the United States was paying for European countries, and then they take advantage of us on trade. But I've seen it. Look, they have to pay. They have to find out, where is the money going to? We have, I believe President Zelenskyy said last week that he doesn't know where half of the money is that we gave him. Well, we gave them, I believe, $350 billion, but let's say it's something less than that, but it's a lot. And we have to equalize with Europe, because Europe has given us given a very much smaller percentage than that. I think Europe has given $100 billion, and we've given, let's say, 300 plus. And it's more important for them than it is for us. We have an ocean in between, and they don't. But where is all the money that's been given? Where is it going? And nobody, I've never seen an accounting of it. We give hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't see any accounting. So I want to see peace. Look, you know why I want? Because I don't want all these people killed anymore. I'm looking at people that are being killed, and they're Russian and Ukrainian people, but they're people. Doesn't matter where they're from on the whole planet. And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic. It's so sad. But with all of that being said, look, it is what it is. When I left, there was no chance that this could have happened. But it happened because we had incompetent leadership at many different levels. But when you see what's taken place in Ukraine with millions of people killed, including the soldiers, millions of people killed, a big percentage of their cities knocked down to the ground. I don't know how anybody even lives there. You know, when they say they took a poll and Zelensky's at 4%, who's living there? You know, I mean, people are, it's hard to believe that people live there. Their cities are being knocked down, and this is something that would have never happened. And by the way, for 4 years, it didn't happen. It was never going to happen. Go ahead.
One follow-up question. How would you counter the perception, because Russia's pushing for this, obviously, they don't really hold true elections, that would be a capitulation of some sort? How would you guard against potentially Russia installing a puppet government? And then finally, how would that new election have an impact on getting Zelenskyy to sign the rare earth minerals deal?
Look, you have leadership, and I like him personally. He's fine. But I don't care about personally. I care about getting the job done. You have leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should have never even happened, even without the United States. Look, we had a president who was grossly incompetent. he had no idea what he was doing. He said some very stupid things, like going in for portions and all of the things. He made a lot of bad statements, but he's grossly incompetent, and I think everyone knew that. This is something that should have never happened, would have never happened. And I used to discuss it with Putin. President Putin and I would talk about Ukraine. And it was the apple of his eye, I will tell you that. But there was never a chance of him going in. And I told him, you better not go in. Don't go in. Don't go in. And he understood that. He understood it fully. But I'm only interested, I want to see if I can save maybe millions of lives. This could even end up in a World War III. I mean, to be honest with you, you've been hearing now Europe is saying, well, I think we're going to go in and we're going to go. All of a sudden, you're going to end up in World War III over something that should have never happened. And, you know, it's a very sad situation. Yeah, please.
President Trump touching down in Miami ahead of a keynote address at a tech summit this evening. It's primarily funded by Saudi Arabia, and it comes on the heels of the country agreeing to host Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin as they attempt to forge ahead on peace talks without Ukraine at the table. And Zelenskyy doesn't like that one bit. Hello, I'm John Roberts in Washington. It's going to be a big afternoon, Sandra.
All right, here we go. Buckle up. I'm Sandra Smith in New York. This is America Reports. So tensions are boiling between President Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. Both presidents taking jabs at each other as President Trump claims Zelenskyy is a dictator without elections and is more responsible for the ongoing war than he's taken credit for.
Meantime, U.S. and Russian officials have agreed they will appoint, quote, high-level teams to begin working on a path forward to end the war. Will that still hold amid the rift between Trump and Zelenskyy?
All right, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was part of those talks. He is on deck. But first, let's get right to Jackie Heinrich. She's live in Miami Beach for us with the very latest. Hi, Jackie.
Hey, Sandra. Yesterday, the president told me that he likes Zelenskyy personally, but personally doesn't matter to him. He cares about getting the job done. He accused Zelenskyy of letting this war go on for too long and not taking a deal. And he confirmed what we'd reported yesterday, that the U.S. supports Ukraine holding elections ahead of any peace deal. That is, of course, something that Russia has been pushing for. But the president said this is not a Russia thing. This comes from me. Zelenskyy fired back this morning. Listen.
Unfortunately, President Trump, with great respect for him as a leader of the people, which we respect very much, the American people who constantly support us, unfortunately lives in this disinformation space.
Zelenskyy took issue with Trump claiming that he has a 4% approval rating, countering that his approval is at 57%. President Trump responded on Truth Social with this, quote, he refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. I love Ukraine, but Zelenskyy has done a terrible job. His country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. Vice President Vance backing him up with this quote, the idea that Zelenskyy is going to change the president's mind by bad-mouthing him in public media. Everyone who knows the president will tell you that is an atrocious way to deal with this administration. This dispute between Trump and Zelenskyy has taken a serious turn since the press conference yesterday. The president was annoyed that Ukraine is sounding off because they were not invited to the initial reset talks with Russia in Saudi Arabia, saying that Ukraine never should have started it, should have made a deal. To that, former Vice President Mike Pence just posted on X, Mr. President, Ukraine did not start this war. Russia launched an unprovoked and brutal invasion of claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The road to peace must be built on truth. So that statement from the president suggesting that Ukraine started this, of course, reverberated across Europe. A lot of reaction coming in. Meantime, President Trump is moving ahead. He says that plans are still underway. He's still planning on meeting with Putin before the end of this month. Sandra.
All right, Jackie Heinrich with the very latest from Florida for us. Jackie, thank you. John.
All right, Sandra, let's dig deeper on this with one of the principals involved in trying to bring a peace to the region. Let's bring in Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. Great to be with you again, Mike. Let me just put up again.
Thanks, John.
what Trump said on Truth Social in part. He said, quote, Zelenskyy admits that half the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move faster. He's not going to have a country left. Zelenskyy probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelenskyy has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. Can you disabuse us of any notion we might have that the president has gone totally south on Zelenskyy?
Well, John, I think just to unpack that a bit, just not everyone has gotten the message that the era of an endless grinding war with death and destruction on all sides, costing hundreds of billions and costing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, that era is over. President Trump has been very clear he intends to bring this war to an end, that all sides need to be bought into that, and that, I think the frustration is really stemmed just in the last week from this bizarre pushback and escalation of rhetoric over a presentation of what we see as an absolute opportunity, and that's to have the United States invest in Ukrainian infrastructure, to have them grow both their minerals, their natural resources, their oil and gas. And I have to tell you, a part of a much bigger pie is certainly better than where it stands today. And then, just as an important subtick to that is that, we look at the type of aid the Europeans are providing, and it's often in the form of loans. It's being repaid with the interest on seized Russian assets. We believe the American taxpayer deserves to recoup much of their investment. All of that's an opportunity for Ukraine. They need to see that for what it is. And instead, we had this kind of escalating rhetoric and pushback, and the president's not going to tolerate it.
Okay, well, this is the president. Mike, welcome to you. Glad to have you back on here. This is President Trump in his own words on Zelenskyy, Palm Beach yesterday. Listen.
You've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. I like him personally. He's fine. But I don't care about personally. I care about getting the job done. You have leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should have never even happened.
Okay, so how should people be interpreting this message? Those were his words yesterday. He has since put out that message over X or Twitter, as John just detailed, calling him a dictator. So how should we characterize this relationship? Well, it's one that's frustrated right now and clearly is going in the wrong direction. But what President Trump is focused on is ending the fighting, going to a ceasefire, and having a broader agreement. That started with his call with President Putin last week. He immediately had a call with President Zelenskyy. They have a term for this in diplomacy called shuttle diplomacy. I don't think anyone should be really, criticizing the president for trying to drive this to a diplomatic solution. And what he said yesterday and today is, why hasn't President Zelenskyy tried to end this war for the betterment of his country? And we have to ask ourselves, is Ukraine's position improving or not on the battlefield? And then thirdly, from the European perspective, I just got off the phone with my counterparts from the United Kingdom, from France, from Germany, and said, look, we welcome Europe stepping in and offering security guarantees. We welcome Europe. We've been asking for years for Europe to step up and contribute more to not only their own defense, but Ukraine's defense. All of that is now happening, and that's because President Trump is driving this very quickly. Some people may not like the order that it's happening, but you have to talk to both sides to get both sides to the table, and that's what we're doing. That's what we did last week and just a few days ago in Saudi Arabia.
All right, so let's talk about what went on in Saudi Arabia. Here was Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State's assessment of the early talks toward negotiations. Listen here.
We haven't really had much engagement with the Russians for almost 3 years, and it sets the table for future conversations. How that turns out will be up to the parties and their willingness not just to make commitments, but to live by them. That'll be tested in the weeks to come.
So it seems that the upshot of Saudi Arabia is that you've appointed some teams to look toward negotiations. That's one thing. but getting to an actual ceasefire and then a peace deal is quite another. In your estimation, judging by the posture of the Russians, we saw Sergei Lavrov there, who's quite well known to everybody, what are the chances that you could actually get a peace deal?
John, I think the chances are good. This was a first positive meeting. Again, it's common sense. You can't get all sides of the table if you don't talk to both sides initially. And that's absolutely what we're doing. We also have General Kellogg out in Kyiv right now as we speak. We had 7 cabinet officers in Europe, in Munich, talking to our European allies. And we have President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom coming to Washington next week. So we're engaging on all sides. And then the next step is we're going to put technical teams forward to start talking more details. But again, just a few months ago, everyone was talking about this war as though it would never end. In just a very short amount of time, President Trump has us, everyone, the Ukrainians, the Russians, the Europeans, talking about now and debating, that's fine, how it's going to end. Only President Trump could drive that shift in conversation, and we have to acknowledge that that's happened. You're going to have voices from the outside saying it should happen this way or that way, but he is the one driving this forward, and it was an honor to be with Secretary Rubio and Steve Witkoff as we had that very first important discussion with the Russians.
Yeah, voices from the outside, voices from the inside. Congress, as you can imagine, reaction is pouring in, Mike, to what we just heard from President Trump on Zelenskyy. This is Senator Blumenthal weighing in on what he says is a betrayal of Ukraine just moments ago.
What world is he living in? It is not only contrary to the facts and the truth, but utterly despicable, a disgusting betrayal of a country that has bled and fought and died for freedom. Our president has so disregarded the truth and the sacrifice of brave men and women who are upholding their freedom and ours. Their fight is our fight, and the president's surrender is pathetic and weak.
That, and earlier today, Chuck Schumer said that the president is siding with a thug like Putin. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, the president also said that he absolutely appreciates and stands with the Ukrainian people. President Trump was, I would remind those senators, the first to arm Ukraine when President Obama wouldn't years ago, and that this war would have never happened with President Trump's leadership. Why? Because he would have had deterrence in place. But no one has a better plan. This is a lot of kind of, chirping and criticism from the outside. But what do we have just in a week's time? We had both sides saying only you, President Trump, can drive an end to this war. A lot of the same voices demanding a ceasefire in Gaza and in the Middle East are now criticizing how we get to a ceasefire now in Europe. And I got to tell you, all those voices will quiet down when we get to that ceasefire and when we get to a broader deal.
Well, we would certainly like to see, I think, the world an end to this war. I guess it's just the circumstances under which it ends. Michael, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Okay, President Trump with a new warning for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy today. Here it is on Truth Social. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization, in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelenskyy admits more than half the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections and is very low in Ukrainian polls. And the only thing he was good at, playing Biden like a fiddle, a dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's going to not have a country left. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating to end the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden tried, he says, and failed to bring peace. wants to keep the gravy train going, he says. And we bring in General Jack Keane, who looks at all of this with us this afternoon. General, always good to have you with us. Fox's senior strategic analyst, former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General, your reaction to this very strongly worded post against Volodymyr Zelenskyy?
Yeah, well, actually, the both of them have been lashing out at each other, and Trump obviously a little bit more publicly and comprehensively than Zelenskyy. And it's really unfortunate, Martha, because President Trump and President Zelenskyy both want the same thing, and that is an enduring peace agreement that protects the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine going forward. And let's face it, this was not going to be accomplished under the previous administration. Putin wasn't about to talk to Biden on any circumstances and refused any overtures about a peace agreement. Putin is at the negotiating table with his team now and had that phone call with the president on Wednesday. And the president wasn't sure that Putin would accept some kind of negotiations that could lead to a peace agreement because he's been obstinate about opposing it in the past. But he said yes. And I think the meeting that took place in Saudi Arabia that we all witnessed was to see if that actually had some strength to it, that it just wasn't propaganda. And the evidence, from our team that was there, it looks like they are willing to do some serious negotiations. I think Zelenskyy overreacted to the fact that he wasn't at that meeting. And he really didn't need to be at that meeting. That was feeling the temperature, so to speak. Is Putin really bluffing to make things look good on a world stage? Is he going to play for real? Because we all know his history. He games these negotiations to his favor and manipulates others, etc. So it turns out to have some substance. But I think that frustrated the president. Then the other underlying thing here that hasn't received that much public notice is that the Trump administration presented to Zelenskyy a deal over the minerals, where the United States would get a stake in the $26 trillion of minerals that are in Ukraine, confirmed by a geological survey company out of Canada that's quite credible. And as a result of that, that would pay back the investment the United States has made in Ukraine over the last couple of years, last 3 years, with weapons and humanitarian economic assistance, but also a long-term strategic economic investment in Ukraine, which would have benefit to Ukraine and also to the United States. But Zelenskyy and his team rejected those terms, not the deal. And I think that really frustrated the president. They are coming up with a counterproposal to do this. I think, given the reality of what we're facing and the fact that both presidents want the same thing, and believe me, both presidents know for a fact that Putin is a thug, he's a killer, he's committed genocide inside of Ukraine, that all the casualties that are out there are a result of an unprovoked attack on Ukraine, and that Putin is a bit of a pathological liar and manipulates negotiations. They both know that. President Trump doesn't talk about it in those terms because I think he believes in personal diplomacy. And, he praises President Xi. He praised Kim Jong-un until he knew Kim Jong-un was bluffing and there was no deal to be had. And he walked out, remember, in Hanoi, Vietnam. Yeah. And the reality is that is why, he sings Putin's praises a bit, because he wants to promote positive relationship to see if he can make a deal of substance. I think this debate, this lashing out at each other is temporary. I don't believe it's long-lasting because our common interests are at stake here, and they will come together and work something out here. And I think the counterproposal that Zelensky's team is putting together will go a long way to accomplish that.
Let me ask you this. He says that Zelenskyy has a 4% approval rating. The numbers that we have seen are more in the 50% range, north of 50% range. And he's criticizing Zelenskyy for not holding elections. Now, clearly, this is something that Russia would like to see happen because they would love to get a Yanukovych or somebody who, is much more favorable to Russia into that seat. Is the president undermining the election process? And can an election take place in the middle of this war at all, General?
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, Zelensky's polling as of February this month is 57% favorable. It was 52 in December. I mean, it was in the 90s in 22 when the war started. But obviously, he's got very favorable ratings. Look at the Constitution that Ukraine has prohibits elections when you declare martial law because of a state of war takes place. And obviously, the incumbent who is trying to run a war to be involved in an election and bringing people together in primaries and other elections puts the people at risk. There's two other parts of that martial law. If you're 18 to 60 years of age and a male, you can't leave the country. And also they're curbing civil liberties, particularly freedom of movement, by curfews in the contested areas. So the fact that their constitution is driving this, the parliament, bipartisan support for all the extensions they've had to the martial law. So they are acting democratically, in my judgment, in abiding by their constitution, and also the parliament is supporting it, which represents the people throughout the country. These are democratic actions taking place in a democratic country. I don't believe we should try and push elections on Zelensky during the middle of this war. I think if there is a peace agreement, I think Zelensky and others and the people themselves will demand an election, and it would likely take place assuming the peace agreement has some real legs to it.
Okay. I know that the Institute for the Study of War said that your organization, that you do not believe that any of his broad ambitions, Putin's broad ambitions, have changed. So one of the big questions that we'll talk about next time we meet, General, is whether or not Putin is going to give any concessions as part of an agreement here. And we'll get more details as this moves along. General, thank you very much. Great to have you with us today.
Yeah, great talking to you, Martha.
Thank you, sir.
Jackie Heinrich is in Miami Beach covering the president's trip and his war of words with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Jackie.
Hey, Will. Yeah, earlier today, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said that the relationship between Presidents Trump and Zelensky right now is pretty frustrated. It's going in the wrong direction. But he said the root of the problem is really Ukraine's refusal to sign a deal that would continue U.S. military support in exchange for access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals. Take a listen.
We look at the type of aid the Europeans are providing, and it's often in the form of loans. It's being repaid with the interest on seized Russian assets. We believe the American taxpayer deserves to recoup much of their investment. All of that's an opportunity for Ukraine.
What about the last one? Now, Trump said Ukraine should hold elections ahead of a peace deal. That's something that Russia's been pushing for. But he said it wasn't a Russian thing, but his personal view. He's claiming Zelensky has let this war really drag on. He's citing his low approval rating, saying it's at 4%. Zelensky disputes that. He claimed it's 57%. But it was this accusation that upset Ukraine the most. Listen here.
I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine.
To that, Zelensky said Trump is living in a, quote, disinformation space, which triggered a strong response on Truth Social. Quote, he refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. Now, there are many logistical questions about how Ukraine could carry out Trump's wish for new elections ahead of a peace deal with any territorial lines drawn. But critics have said that this plays into Putin's hand. They've sounded off around the world about it. The president, though, seems really only to care about the bottom line here. Yesterday, he even told me he likes Zelensky personally, but he's just let this drag on too far. So we are set to hear from the president shortly here at this summit, Will, and we'll bring you any headlines that come out of it.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Jackie. We'll check in with you when we hear from the president.
War in Ukraine becomes the subject of a war of words between President Trump and Ukraine's leader. Volodymyr Zelenskyy says the American president is living in a Russian-made disinformation space. President Trump calls Zelenskyy a dictator without elections. That exchange comes after President Trump dismissed complaints by Zelenskyy that he was not invited to talks in Saudi Arabia between the U.S. and Russia about the Ukraine conflict. Senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy starts us off tonight live from the North Lawn. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Brett. When President Trump got back to the Oval Office last month, he said he thought Putin was destroying Russia because he thought with the Ukraine war, Putin wasn't doing so well. But now that Ukraine is moving slower than Trump wants with a rare earth minerals deal, that has been flipped. Now President Trump says it is Zelenskyy to blame for millions of deaths.
Other parts of the world, not so good.
President Trump is trashing Volodymyr Zelenskyy as a modestly successful comedian and a dictator without elections, writing, Zelenskyy better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. The relationship frayed.
Well, it's one that's frustrated right now and clearly is going in the wrong direction.
Because after Trump blamed the Russian invasion on Ukraine,
You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
and Democrats condemned Trump,
It's disgusting to see an American president turn against one of our friends and openly side with a thug like Vladimir Putin.
Zelenskyy did too.
President Trump, with great respect for him as a leader, unfortunately lives in this disinformation space.
A warning in the Daily Mail from Vice President Vance. The idea that Zelenskyy is going to change the president's mind by bad-mouthing him in public media, everyone who knows the president will tell you that is an atrocious way to deal with this administration. Russian diplomats say there may or may not be a Trump-Putin meeting next week.
It needs to be prepared so that it brings a result.
Trump's predecessor kept his criticism private. In 2022, NBC reported President Biden raised his voice to Zelenskyy on a phone call, telling him the American people were being quite generous and Zelenskyy could show a little more gratitude. A lot has changed in 2.5 years.
There's no better place on earth than the current and future United States of America under a certain president named Donald J. Trump.
And more news ahead tonight. President Trump plans to sign another executive order, this one telling federal agencies to stop providing federal financial benefits to illegal aliens, including in sanctuary cities. The plan is for him to sign that on his way back here aboard Air Force One. Brett?
Peter Doocy live on the North Lawn. Peter, thank you.
I love Ukraine, but Zelenskyy has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions of people have unnecessarily died. And you can't bring a war to an end if you don't talk to both sides. You got to talk. They haven't been talking for 3 years. So we hope to see a ceasefire soon and to reestablish stability in Europe and the Middle East.